Hi, everyone. This is Chuck Head, Director of Customer Onboarding here at Domino. Thanks for joining. We're really excited to share with you what we've been working on here at Domino. Today, we'll be walking through some of the new features of Domino 3.0. Given the number of attendees, we won't be taking live questions. We will be sending out the recording. And of course, feel free to reach out to your Customer Success Manager with any follow-ups. With the release of Domino 3.0, we're taking a big step towards our vision laid out at Rev, our user conference earlier this year. Domino 3.0 adds features both for existing users and opens up the product to new stakeholders. In particular, we're focused on improving the day-to-day experience for existing users while also helping data science publish their work out to their consumers. We hope these features will help our users and our customers on their journey towards becoming a more model-driven organization. Without further ado, let's dive into what's new. Today, we'll be looking primarily at 4 new feature areas of Domino 3.0. The new UI navigation, which is a simpler workflow for data scientists, the Launchpad, a new app publishing flow, and also a new way for stakeholders to consume data science products. Control Center, which is a whole new area of our product that gives IT administrators and data science leaders transparency into how their resources are being used on the platform. And finally, new platform APIs, which makes it easier to build on top of and integrate with Domino. Let's look now at the new navigation and UI of Domino 3.0. The goal here was to make Domino easier for existing users, but also make it more approachable for new users. Let's actually look into the product. You'll notice here that much of this will look the same, but a lot of it will look brand new to existing users. We've reoriented the nav bar from the top to over here on the left. And most importantly, we started to break the product into 3 different distinct areas. The first, the lab, we're going to do most of your model development. We're going to kick off runs, set your environment, and train your models. The Launchpad, so after you've trained a model and you want to publish that out, you're going to put that in the Launchpad, whether that's an app or a model API, and in the future, a scheduled run. Or the Control Center, an area for IT admins and data science leaders to get some transparency across the org. So looking here at the lab, you still got all of the projects that you're working on. You can still see the projects that you're collaborating on with others. Let's actually click into one of our projects here. I'll click into the retirement simulator one. So in this project here, you'll notice that you've still got your overview with a nice README. We've moved the fork and archive and copy up here to the overview. You'll also continue to have your runs and your workspaces and your files. Some feedback we've received over the last year is folks are really interested in preserving as much real estate as possible. So we've made it collapsible over here. You could actually hide this whole nav bar, get as much screen real estate as possible when working in Domino. So you'll still be able to get to your workspaces, get to your files, and get to your settings within this run. In addition to the nav changes here, we've also improved the search from Domino. So now our search, we have a quick search here. By clicking on the search icon up here on the left, I could search, say I wanted to search for an Uber project, for example. I get a quick, fast search where I could see projects and see files. I can continue on to the old navigation also if I wanted to dive deeper into full search results if I'd like. With the Launchpad, we've created a whole new workflow around publishing applications. Whether that's apps, a Shiny app, a Bokeh app, a Plotly Dash app, or even a Flask app in Python. With Domino, you're going to be able to publish that directly from the project where you created it using the hardware and the environment that you've selected. You're also going to be able to set fine-grained permissions for it. In addition to work on the app publishing side for the data scientists, as part of the Launchpad, we've created a whole portal for end consumers to find and discover and get entry into those applications. Let's actually take a look here in the product. So I'm back here in the retirement simulator project that we saw before. And in this case, we created a little Shiny app. If you're familiar with Shiny, you would know the common UI.R and server.R files that represent any standard Shiny app. We just save those here in our files folder. Then for the publish screen here, I'm actually able to publish that app. So from here, I could start that app, I could stop that app, and I could decide what hardware tier I wanted to run on. So in this case, we've got this retirement simulator app here. End users are able to interact, rerun multiple scenarios to calculate a retirement simulation. So not only can we publish the app, we could also add a nice description and nice title for it, which makes it searchable and discoverable. And like I mentioned, you're also able to control the permissions at a fine-grained level. So in this case, I can make the application available to anybody, whether they're anonymous or not, restrict it to just Domino users, or make it so only select users are able to find it. So I could add my colleague here, John Conway, if I'd like, invite him to this project. And if I wanted to take away his access, I can, of course, revoke it here. So if you're noticing carefully, you'll also notice from this publishing screen, we've got the view app link here. So I've got a shareable URL that lets me send this application out to somebody if I'd like to share it in that way or embed it somewhere else. But I've also am able to select here, show in Launchpad. When I select show in Launchpad here, what that's going to do is going to publish this to the Launchpad part of our product. Let's switch over to that now. The idea here is that an end consumer would have an entry point into Domino where they could actually find all the data science products. In this case, right now we have apps and model APIs. Let's talk about apps here. You can see that app that I just published, that retirement calculator here. I've also got another live one here. I'm also able to find other applications that aren't running. In this case, Nick has given me permission to see this app here. And if I notice that it's not running at the time, but I can email the author and ask him to republish that application for me. So looking here at the retirement calculator, I could see when it was published, who was published by. I could create a short description for it if I'd like. And there's traceability back to the project here. So from the screen, if it's my project, I can actually go back to where it was developed. So from the same project publishing screen here, I showed you how to publish it. I showed you how to set the permissions and set the description. But we also added this ability to see the usage. So in this case, for this application, I could actually look back over the last month and I could see what the usage is. A lot of feedback we've received from many of our users is that they publish applications and they create data science products, but they don't know what's happening to them when they get out in the wild, wild world. They've created something, they think somebody wants it, but then they don't know who's using it and how often they're using it. And with this, in this case, I could see that my colleague Rainier is actually seen this application and viewed this application 7 times over this time period. This is going to provide a feedback loop. I could tell whether there's an ROI for this application, if it was worth my effort. I could tell whether the person who requested is using it or whether it's gone viral in the organization and a whole bunch of other people are using it. This is a nice way to start to close the loop between the data scientists and the people consuming their work. Let's now look over to the control center, our next piece of Domino 3.0. With the control center, we've created an in-app dashboard, which provides data science managers and administrators a view into how their resources are being used. They can see who's working on what and who's spending what, whether that's by project, by user, or hardware tier. The idea here is we want to give folks more feedback into how resources are being spent and what their ultimate ROI is. Let's look now into the control center. Clicking over here, into the control center, if you're an administrator on your platform, you're going to be able to see, in addition to the lab and the launchpad, you're going to be able to see and switch over to the control center. On the control center, I'm able to see what our daily compute spend was across all our different hardware tiers. I'm able to edit the dates for that if I'd like. I can see it by dollar spend or by compute hour, if that makes sense to you. I can see the top projects usage, top users, or even slice this by hardware tier. If I want to, I can actually click into one of the projects. Let's click into my colleague Jithin's project here. And in that case, I could see in this project, he's actually doing most of his work in an application. If it was a larger spending project and I really wanted to drill into it, I could drill all the way down into his specific run. In this case, I could see the actual run and I could load the actual run where he was spending dollars. So in the dashboard, we've tried to provide you some basic usage stats around who's working on what. But we know our consumers and our customers are data scientists and analysts by heart. So not only will we expose the data here within the application, but we're also exposing it to you via an API. You can load this data into your BI tool of choice, whether that's Power BI or Tableau. Let's look at an example of it in Tableau. Looking here in Tableau, we can see much of the same data from the control center. I can see my usage by user, see it by run type, see it by project. And I could also use the full power of this BI tool to actually slice and dice the data in any way that I'd like. I could really drill into my colleague Tim's usage here. I could see the types of runs that he's using, the projects he's working on. The idea here is that we want to give you ultimate flexibility to use the data in whatever makes sense in your organization, and create dashboards and expose this data however you'd like. So the ultimate goal here of the control center is to start providing some transparency and some feedback on ROI. We know from larger organization that it's hard to stay on top of 10, 20, 30, or actually hundreds of users within an organization and see who's doing what. With a control center, you have a one-stop shop in order to actually see and view that data. Let's now talk about the Domino platform APIs that we've extended as part of Domino 3.0. With the release of Domino 3.0, we're also going to be adding a large number of platform APIs. These are APIs in which you can actually control Domino programmatically. In particular, we focused around the user and project and organization controls. It's not very visual, so I won't show you much here. But if you look in our new documentation, you can see the new APIs that we've added, the ones around users, organizations, and projects. Well, we've got some feedback from our customers, and we've responded to that by allowing them to start to control these things from outside of Domino. We appreciate that as a platform, Domino fits into a larger ecosystem of data and analysis within a whole organization. In some cases, we've seen companies who have ticketing systems and they want to manage access control in Domino through their ticketing system. In other cases, we see customers who have front-end portals where they're collecting their data science products, and they want to start indexing stuff from Domino into that. With these APIs, it's really easy to actually integrate and start to connect to Domino, whether that's getting a list of all the projects across the whole organization, creating a copy of that project, or controlling the users themselves.
As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we're not going to take specific questions given the number of attendees during this session. However, we've heard a couple common questions that I wanted to address here to help you get started with Domino 3.0. I'm going to walk through a few of those now and hopefully preempt some of your questions. Of course, feel free to reach out to your CSM or our support team if you have follow-up questions. Let's first look at the control center. So one question we received about the control center is how is it going to deal with calculating costs for on-premise deployments? Instead of deploying into cloud, many of our customers have Domino installed onto bare metal. In those situations where there's obviously no variable costs in order to calculate. However, the cost is actually controlled in Domino in 3.0 by setting in your admin settings. I'll show that in a sec. So for each tier, you can actually set your own synthetic cost. We find this useful for customers whether they're doing chargeback or just trying to get some idea of what their resource usage is. So if you look here in the application, this will look familiar to admins. Under your advanced and then under your hardware tiers, you could find, for example, this medium hardware tier. In this case, we're looking at an M5 X large in AWS, and we've entered its EC2 cost here as about 1/3 of a cent a minute. If you were working on premise, you can enter whichever cost you'd like here, and thus you can calculate your own costs. It might be useful for admins who are looking to attribute costs back to different departments, or attribute them back to different teams, or even just individuals. So use your true costs, your variable costs, or whatever sort of cost makes sense to you. The second question we received is, how can you actually get the data out of the control center? What does that API look like? So let me show that here. Let me first talk about the syntax. So we've exposed all the data available in the control center directly via an API. So you could simply curl this if you'd like, or you could use any other application that could post to an API. So in this case, you'd enter your deployment address. You can enter a limit of the number of results, add your API key, and then pipe it out to CSV if you'd like. Let me show you an example of what that would look like here. Just pulling up a simple terminal, I can actually curl here, looking at our beta deployment, beta.domino.tech, using my API key. Don't worry, this is just a temporary one. And pipe that out to the control center .csv file. Once the data is downloaded, navigate to the specific file, and I could open it in Excel. So once it's in Excel, I've got the run ID, the actual command that was run, the user ID, some timestamps around it, and then the actual total cost for every individual run. So we're giving you the data here at a relatively granular level. This is going to allow you to slice and dice it however you'd like, manipulate it or filter it in ways that make sense for you. So with this API, we sort of break you out of having to use Domino's native BI tools and put it in whatever tools or automate it in any way that you'd like. So you can pull this data using the API on demand, or it should be relatively simple to create a scheduled job or a batch job to pull this data nightly, weekly, or whatever makes sense for you. So the data that we're showing here is rather robust, but we'll be continuing to add more data. So expect to see changes over the near future. And also, if there's other types of data that you'd like to see coming out of Domino, feel free to reach out to support or the CSM or your product manager. We'd love to hear that feedback since we'll be iterating on this relatively rapidly. Let's look now here at the Launchpad. So we've got some questions that we heard around the Launchpad. Particularly, this first question is around scaling and performance of apps in Domino. So depending upon your configuration for each app, those apps are either going to run on a dedicated machine or on a shared machine with other apps. In Domino 3.0, we don't yet have the capability to run apps across multiple machines. So as you think about scaling and performance, one thing you have to be aware of is the language that you're using to write the app. If you're working in Shiny, you'll be working in R, which is a single process language, and thus you'll want to be conscious of how many concurrent users you'll have. Each user can get their own session within the app, but the app is only going to be able to process one request at a time. For Python, with applications like Flask or Dash, you have a little more flexibility. But keep in mind that by choosing the correct hardware tier, you can make sure that you have the CPU and memory sufficient for your application. On our support site, we've put together some tips and tricks and a little more guidance around how you should think about scaling up your application. In general, apps in Domino they're not intended to be web scale and are best used for rapid iteration with internal stakeholders. Based upon the feedback from our customers, our engineering team is in the process of migrating the app infrastructure onto Kubernetes, which is going to add the benefit of horizontal scalability along with the vertical scalability that we have today. This work is slated for early 2019, and of course, feel free to reach out to your CSM if you have any other questions. One other question that we received is about the migration path, specifically around applications in Domino 3.0. So while this is a relatively major feature addition from going from 2.x to 3.0, the actual upgrade, and we've worked really hard to make this feasible, is actually going to fit within the same footprint as your previous installation or deployment of Domino, and is actually going to be very similar to any other update that we might apply for you. In terms of actually migrating and backwards compatibility, we've worked hard to make it so it'll be relatively seamless for you. Particularly for apps, by default, apps that you had published previous to 3.0, they will not be published and discoverable to the Launchpad. We didn't want to surprise anybody by making work that they wanted to keep private, make that discoverable. But we also have made all the permissions backward compatible. So if you had a user or stakeholder or an organization who had access to an application prior to 3.0, they're going to have access to it after the upgrade also. It should be seamless for the end user. As for the control center, since this is net new functionality, the only key thing to think about here is make sure you have those costs entered. When you enter the costs for each one of your hardware tiers, that'll populate and trickle through to your control center. And we're going to apply the data back historically all the way to the beginning of January 2018. So once you add those costs, your control center should look robust, and you'll have a bunch of historical data to do analysis on right out of the gate. And finally, question about the UI. So as I walked through this, I showed you a whole bunch of changes we've made to the UI. While this is going to be the new framework, the new style, and the new paradigm we're using, we applied it thus far to most of our high traffic areas. So you'll notice this on the project's overview, the lab, the control center, but some spaces we have yet to get to. So like workspaces and your runs dashboard, those will be changing over the next few months or the next quarter. Our engineering team is hard at work on those things. So you'll notice that the UI continues to evolve and move towards a new paradigm over the next couple of releases. Keep an eye out for new changes. So finally, I want to talk a little about logistics and next steps. As I mentioned before, if you didn't have your question answered here, feel free to reach out to your customer success manager or support team. They'd be happy to follow up with you. We'll be launching Domino 3.0 in mid-October here, and we'll be releasing it and upgrading customers over the next few weeks. You'll have to work directly with your CSM in order to schedule the upgrade. It's going to be dependent upon the logistics and actual infrastructure of your deployment, but we'll be phasing those out in the next few weeks. Again, thanks for joining today, and I hope you're as excited about Domino 3.0 as we are.